Paul here from My Perfect Failure, helping you turn your failures into successes and your setbacks into opportunities. What happens when the career you poured your life into, your application, your effort to enter the high-stakes world of Michelin Star fine dining is suddenly replaced by years of being bedridden? Today, we welcome Inder Virdi, who worked alongside culinary giants, the likes of Heston Blumenthal, before an unexpected battle with chronic fatigue syndrome forced him into a complete life and career pivot. This shares the brutal reality of living with an invisible illness, how his journey forced him to study neuroscience and become a nutritional therapist, and a surprising philosophy that service is always more important than food. In this journey from Michelin kitchens to medical research is inspiring, and it also shows the power of human curiosity and resilience. So if you're ready for an inspiring story of resilience and recovery, hit play wherever you get your podcast.
Who knows what Jay-Z, J.K. Rowling, Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey all have in common? Okay, I will tell you then. They have all overcome failure in one shape or form to go on to gain success in their respective careers. Welcome to My Perfect Failure. Join us as we delve into the world of our perfect failures. We will interview, explore, and discuss how our perfect failures can lead us to success. Join us and tune in.
Welcome everybody to another episode of My Perfect Failure. Today I'm super excited because I have another amazing guest for you. So joining us today, we have an amazing guest who started his career in the fast-paced world of fine dining, working alongside top chefs like Heston Blumenthal and Brett Graham at the Ledbury. In his early 20s, life took an unexpected turn when he developed chronic fatigue syndrome. The next 6 years were spent on a challenging journey to reclaim his health, supporting his body, and addressing the underlying trauma. This experience completely reshaped his path and led him to retrain as a nutritional therapist, eventually going on to study neuroscience at King's College London. Today, he runs a busy clinic where he's dedicated to helping people through chronic illness and trauma, and was part of the research team at the Gupta Program, a neuroplasticity program designed for chronic conditions. So a very warm welcome to My Perfect Failure, Inder Virdi. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Paul. How are you doing?
I'm doing extremely well. I'm
Good.
excited to have this conversation with you. I did say to you before I hit the record button that I listened to your podcast you kindly sent me yesterday, and it was not yesterday. Sorry, you sent it me a while ago, but I listened to it yesterday, and it was brilliant and very inspired by you, your journey, what you've overcome, and also kind of path that it's taken you on. It's taken you on a path where I don't know what you're doing now. If you hadn't suffered, I guess the chronic fatigue syndrome, was this ever in your thoughts to pursue the career that you're pursuing now?
You know, I often think about where I would have been had this not have happened. And the honest answer is, I don't know. When I was at school, I kind of always had two paths in my mind, which was kind of either being a doctor or certainly doing something in health. I was absolutely fascinated
Okay,
with surgery and just healthcare in general. And then secondly, the second path was business. So I was, very much interested in those two paths. So I'm really not sure, to be honest.
okay. So possibly it might have been there because you mentioned that there was some interest in health and the medical profession.
Definitely. But I didn't get the grades at the time to do anything actually in biomedical science whatsoever. So I ended up going down the business route.
Okay. So, and I say from listening to that podcast yesterday, I sense you've got quite a curious mind. So you can turn your hand to different, whether it be business, entrepreneurship, the medical profession. Because sometimes we can be quite, not everybody, but I think the majority of us really want to focus on one area and stick to that area.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And actually, I partly have my teachers to thank for that, because at our school, we kind of had a choice between doing traditional A levels, which generally did funnel kids down into a specialist set of subjects, and then normally would translate into a job. But with us, we did the IB, which actually incorporated the whole range of subjects: humanity, science, languages. So it actually kept my mind completely open. But I was also always just quite a generalist. So yeah, so I think that was a very interesting observation you made, because that's definitely true. I feel, yeah, I've got so many different interests. I can talk about so many different things. Yeah, so definitely.
So when something crops up, because sometimes I guess I'm thinking about me a little bit. If it's not something that I've maybe got some background on, I probably will tend to kind of instinctively, I might think, but I don't know anything about that, so I'm not even going to go down that route. What's your thoughts when that happens? Does curiosity take over and you want to maybe delve into it?
So it depends. The honest answer is it depends. So if it's a subject that I have absolutely no affinity with, so if you, I don't know, if you ask me to go learn about, I don't know, shipyards or something,
Mm,
chances are I probably wouldn't. It'd be very
okay.
difficult for me. Having said that, I love the feeling of starting at zero, because there's no preconceptions, and I also love being proven wrong. So I love learning something new, and I love just approaching it from zero, building a foundation. So yeah, absolutely, I love just do love learning. So learning
I
new things.
love that approach. I love that approach for somebody that likes to start at zero, because particularly today with social media, I think most people want almost to be on the mountaintop without actually having done the work.
Yeah, definitely that's true. I mean, I think one downside of being a generalist like myself is I like having a broad set of knowledge, maybe not as deep as it could be, but I like having a broad set of knowledge and skills that I can then incorporate into anything. So yeah, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely guilty of that. I felt like when I started my business, I was too early, I was too young, didn't know enough. But yeah, again, you just figure it out, you learn, you observe, and yeah, and you just make the best of it, do your best.
Yeah. And I guess ultimately we never know enough. I would listen to something this and a lot I think I listened to something like this statement a few times. So the best time to start your business was 20 years ago. The next best time to start it is now.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, okay. So you've got an incredibly interesting background and an incredibly interesting journey. So where I thought might be a good place to start is at the beginning. So I mentioned, I think, in your bio that you got into fine dining. How did that come? And you worked at the Ledbury with some amazing chefs. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so I am by nature a very obsessive person. So if there is something that grasps my interest, I just latch onto it like a crab, and I don't really let go. And when I was about 14 or 15, it was around the time that Gordon Ramsay was starting to appear a lot more on TV. There was also a show on the BBC called Great British Menu. I don't know if
Yeah, I
you.
remember that. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know what it was. We would come on TV, and it just I don't know, lit a bulb in my mind, and I just became absolutely obsessed with food and chefs. And I was like, it was like an addiction. I can't describe it. I don't know what it was. And then my dad asked me, like, what did I want for what would I like for my birthday? And I said, oh, I'd love to go to a Gordon Ramsay restaurant for my birthday as my present. And I remember eating there, just thinking, God, this is incredible. This is just another world. And yeah, basically ended up doing some work experience in the kitchen as a chef. Realized very quickly that I was not a chef.
Okay. That was
People,
going to be my next question. So thank you.
yeah, but I was not a chef at all. I was much more of a people person. I loved being in the front of house, being more of a showman, connecting with the guests. Like when I was working at Heston Blumenthal's place in London, a restaurant called Dinner, it was quite incredible. But we were having people fly literally from Australia to come have dinner there, and it was just such
Wow.
an incredible feeling to be able to be a part of someone's special occasion, or to fulfill a lifelong dream. It's incredible.
So literally, you get people flying from Australia just to have dinner.
Yeah. I remember one of my colleagues saying, "Oh, he was looking after this couple, and he just was making polite chit chat." And they said that they'd come from Australia, and he says, "Oh, like," and his response was, "Oh, do you have a? Is there a wedding or is there something else going on? If that's brought you to London?" And they said, "No, we've come to eat here," and it's just very humbling and incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking, how do you get yourself, how to get your brand, obviously the quality of food service, et cetera, but to get yourself to the point where you're getting people just to come and, well, obviously to come and have an amazing dinner. But the likelihood is that they'll be in that restaurant for, I don't know, what's the average dinner duration, 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, it's not longer.
And yeah, that's incredible. So that must have been obviously Heston is worldly renowned, clearly, and he's someone that obviously is incredibly popular. What is it like working with him at that time? It must have been, I guess you've already described an incredible moment.
Yeah, it was quite interesting because I'd actually worked in a few, how do I say, more traditional kitchens, chefs who had climbed the ranks through traditional French restaurants in London. Those kitchens were run with a very heavy hand,
Okay.
shouting, discipline, very sometimes very unpleasant environments.
Yeah.
Whereas Heston didn't really come from that environment. He was pretty much self-taught. And him and Ashley Palmer Watts really incorporated a much more familial, caring, supportive environment. So it was firstly a breath of fresh air, just the fact that everyone was a lot more caring, supporting, and also we had the benefit because the restaurant was inside the Mandarin Oriental, so we kind of had their HR umbrella over us.
Okay.
But it was just, I mean, I remember seeing the dishes for the first time and trying a few of the dishes, and it was just mind blowing. And two things that struck me: one, how the hell does somebody come up with this with an idea like this?
Yeah.
And secondly, just how light and how digestible the food was, because you often assume or associate rich, luxurious food with being very heavy, but it's
Yeah.
very much the opposite.
Yeah. I don't have the. Yeah, I'm similarly. I'm not a chef as well, but I do take your point to come up with those ideas, those recipes, to put them on the plate in combination that people love. And yeah, that must have been an incredible time. So fine dining. So how long did you do that for? When did you come out of that space?
So for the best part of 5, 6 years, I was in hospitality.
Okay, okay. And so hospitality you did for 5-ish years or so. And what led you to moving out of that space?
So there were two things. I mean, firstly, as I was approaching into sort of year 4, year 5, I was thinking to myself, I'm not sure I'm being completely intellectually challenged here. But that was sort of in the background. I absolutely thrived on being in that environment, meeting customers, the buzz of service, the pressure. I
Yeah,
absolutely loved it. But there was that feeling in the background. But more sort of significantly, I started to develop symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome around that time. So for me, it was just a feeling of no get up and go. It was I was
yeah,
having to really drag myself out in the morning and would have to have an espresso to just try and get functioning. I would fall asleep on the train. It just things weren't quite right. And then I've noticed as well, like you have to have quite a good working memory to be working in a restaurant. You've got to think the table numbers, when to put the knives and forks down, when to top up, blah blah blah. And I just noticed that my memory was becoming a lot more sluggish, and I was
and
forgetting.
you noticed that.
Absolutely. I was forgetting things. And I even one night when I came home, I left the keys in the front door and I was not met with, I was not met by my grandpa. I was
Yeah,
with my grandpa at the time. He was not impressed the following morning
yeah.
when he
Well,
just,
that can happen. I've definitely done that, so I know that that can happen. But I guess that was obviously a symptoms of other situations that you'd noticed.
exactly 100%. So anyway, it started to slowly creep. And then I from memory, it feels like a long time ago now, but I developed flu-like symptoms. So just sort of just feeling fatigued, muscle aches, just feeling run down. Went to bed and I woke up just feeling like the life had been completely sucked out of me. And basically, I didn't get out of bed for 3 or 4 years.
That's insane. So when it initially happened, you must have been incredibly confused about what was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it coincided with a stressful time as well. So I'll be honest, at that in that moment, there was a little bit of relief, like, oh, thank God, I can take a bit of time off.
Yeah,
Uh, But yeah, I mean, we've all had viral infections where it's taken a few weeks to recover. So that initial few days wasn't too scary, but it was when week 2 turned into week 3, turned into week 4. That is when I started to feel a bit worried, to be honest.
So what was going on during that time? So initially you felt fatigued, not yourself. There'd been a build up, went to bed, then that turned into 2 or 3 years. During that time, what I guess you were going to doctors, you were going to see consultants. What's happened during that period?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, obviously first port of call, I went to see my GP. My white cell count was a little bit low, and he just said, "Oh, you have a viral infection. You've had a viral bug of some kind. You'll be fine. You'll be fine in a few days. It may take a couple of weeks, but you'll be fine." And then I said to him, "Yeah, but this has been like 6 weeks." And he said, "Oh, well, don't worry. You'll be fine." And by the way, and this was sort of still in a time when things like viral infections were not really appreciated in their full realm in terms of contributing to fatigue and brain fog and various other issues like skin issues. Now, especially since COVID has accelerated the learning curve, certainly for doctors and scientists. So yeah, so this was before that time. So it was still very, very, very niche.
What circle are we talking in terms of timeline?
This was about 2012-ish.
Okay, 2012. Okay.
Yeah, which doesn't seem that long ago, but a lot's changed in the science world.
Okay.
Yeah, and then ended up seeing several specialists like endocrinologists, immunologists, did some tests. Yeah, there was some there were some markers suggestive of a viral thing, but it wasn't a big deal. I was very young. Yeah, you'll be fine, kind of thing. And there's nothing else we could do. And then I thought, okay, well, there's clearly something wrong here. So I went to see some naturopaths and GAPS practitioners and lots of different types of alternative practitioners. Some of them recognized it, but I tried their protocols. So for example, very low carb diets, the GAPS diet. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's a kind of that's basically it's a low carb diet with lots of bone broth and lots of proteins to help repair the gut lining. It became quite popular in helping kids with autism, as an example, and allergies and things like that. But I found actually a lot of these interventions made me worse. And then I met a nutritional therapist, the first nutritional therapist who worked with a lot with athletes and recognized what was going on. He prescribed me or recommended me some supplements that definitely helped about 50, 60%. But still, I was just trudging through life feeling like I had this anchor around my neck or around my ankle. And then I ended up basically, yeah, for the next few months, few years, just survived. And then eventually met a nutritional therapist who changed my life, who inspired me to retrain. And the rest is history.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that point. But what was it like? I'm just thinking about the process. I remember, I don't think it was last year, maybe the year before, I had COVID. Actually, I didn't have any testing kits. I wasn't able to test myself, but I'm fairly certain it was COVID. And I was pretty much bedridden for maybe around a week. And that was tough. It was tough being bedridden or out of commission for 1 week. So I'm curious to how mentally you survived not being at full tilt for 3, 4, 5 years. How did you cope mentally during this time?
In the earlier days, there was a huge amount of, I'd say, shame, frustration. But at the same time, the irony is you're so exhausted. It's one of those feelings you can't really describe unless you've experienced it, but you're so exhausted, you just feel very resigned to the moment in some ways. In some ways, you're actually more present than most people are ever in their lives. But I would say, yeah, there was a huge amount of frustration, shame, disappointment. Comparison kicks in. I think that was a big thing I do remember. I compared myself a lot to guys of my own age doing things that I couldn't do, which I think is natural. And then I actually wrote a couple articles on my blog several years later about this. And I basically said, you got to try and focus as much as you can on what you can do and not what you can't.
Yeah, very helpful.
The light is actually in those moments, like even just being able to go downstairs and have a conversation. That's what keeps you going.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the mind works. That you mentioned that, feelings like shame, which we should never think like that when we're ill, but when we're in these challenging moments, that's where our brain takes us, to shame and comparison. You've got an illness that you're trying to deal with, and then we're trying to then our brain tells us to compare ourselves to others, and that obviously can make a difficult situation even worse.
100%, absolutely. And the cruel thing about CFS is, yeah, if you exert yourself, so for example, the first cruel thing is that it's very unpredictable. That it just seemingly one day you'll feel a bit better and you'll be able to push yourself a little bit, and then for unknown reasons you'll feel be worse another day. But the other thing is, on a day that you feel good, if you push yourself too hard, so if you just walk an extra 50 meters than you normally would, or it comes back with a vengeance and the symptoms come back twice as hard. So it's a very difficult thing to manage for sure.
That's really difficult.
Mm.
That's really difficult because in those moments where we feel that we're okay, obviously we're going to be quite elated that we feel better, and then we're going to be quite, I imagine, quite infused to maybe do some things that potentially we haven't been able to do, and then I guess we get a kick in the teeth the next day or days after.
100%. Exactly. I always describe it as one step forward, two steps back. It's very much that type of dynamic.
Okay, so when actually were you diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome? How sort of long into the process were you actually given a diagnosis?
Well, interestingly, I was never given a diagnosis because at that time, ME was so niche and so extreme. It was like there was like one tertiary center in the whole of the southeast at that time. So I never formally received it. I did have I do it on my GP letters and specialist letters. They queried chronic fatigue syndrome, but they thought that I was going to get better from it.
Okay,
Uh, and
so
that's, by the way, I
you
should say that's very, excuse me, that's very common. A lot of,
okay,
I would say probably at least half the patients who say that they have CFS are self-diagnosed. They don't even bother seeing doctors.
okay. So the medical profession at that time, clearly, we're talking 2012, it was, were there not enough experts in that process, or the system kind of broken in terms of been able have been able to access the right people with the right knowledge base to I guess to identify the signs.
Yeah, I mean, it is an extreme. I mean, still today, relatively, it's rare, but even back then, it was extremely rare. So typically with rare diseases, there's only ever a handful of specialists ever. So, and it's kind of a feedback loop where research, if there's not enough patients, or it's not a big disease, then you don't attract
Yeah,
research funding, and there are less researchers, which then feeds back into doctor knowledge and the number of doctors who pick up that research and implement it in their practice. So at that time, yeah, it was very, very niche.
yeah. You said something on the podcast I listened to where you talked about sometimes it can be difficult when the disease or the complaint is invisible.
Yeah, absolutely. So funnily enough, I had a busy clinic last week, and there was a patient who had a couple of kids. She was quite poorly during the last trimester of the second child's birth, and she just has she gave birth to the child, and her life has never been the same since. And she was very down. And I said to her, don't forget something. It's actually, in some respects, no disrespect to people with significant medical disease, but in some ways, it's harder to have conditions like CFS, brain fog, fibromyalgia, chronic pain. It's much more difficult to have those conditions because they're invisible. You can't see
Yeah,
scan. There's no real medical. Well, today it's changed. There are diagnoses, but people still don't get it, even if you are diagnosed. So in many respects, it's much harder because it's invisible.
yeah. And I'm just thinking about when we go and see our doctors and GPs, sometimes it's difficult for us to explain things, particularly when they're invisible. We try and do our best to try and give the doctors, the GPs, the best possible opportunity to treat us and identify it. But when something is invisible and maybe we're not, and also we're potentially ill at that time, so our ability to be able to give the best description might be a bit challenged.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would say, like I said, a lot's changed since 2012, 2013, where we do have much more, how can I say, the research, the diagnostic criteria are quite detailed now, quite
Okay.
involved. And GPs and specialists are far better trained and far better equipped to diagnose, treat to much lesser extent. Unfortunately, there's still not a lot that they can do in treatment terms, but definitely to recognize it. Things have changed a lot, and COVID has accelerated that.
Okay. So I want to get onto the nutrition bit in a second, but I just want to ask you about chronic fatigue syndrome in terms of are there things that we can do to mitigate it or stopping it happening? I don't know whether there's ever been done or if there is research on that.
Yes. So when people say chronic fatigue, it means different things to different people, but it generally means two things. So chronic fatigue can be chronic fatigue syndrome in that entity, or also known as ME/CFS. And that is when somebody is essentially bedbound and they have a set of symptoms, extreme symptoms, brain fog, muscle aches and pains, sometimes fevers, joint pain, digestive issues, etc., etc. And then chronic fatigue to others could just mean that they feel constantly everything's an effort. They have to drag themselves out of bed. Everything just feels like a drag, but they're able to function and do their jobs, but it's hard work. So what I'll say first, let's start with ME/CFS. So ME/CFS, there is a lot of interesting research coming out suggesting that trauma predisposes us to the development of CFS because the emotional centers of the brain, the part of the brain that's responsible for detecting threats and helping us protect us from those threats, that part is far more overactive than it should be. And if that continues to be overactive, that can lock the stress response system into a state of stress and floods the system with high levels of hormones. And it can increase your risk of staying stuck when, for example, developing a viral infection that we all are exposed to and develop. But if you are in that state of vigilance and hyperactivity, that increases your chances massively of locking in that CFS state into your system. So absolutely. So I would say first, if you can, just don't have any trauma.
Yeah.
And, se- and secondly, just be aware that if you are going through a very stressful time and maybe not looking after yourself, and then you develop a viral bug, you are massively increasing your risk of
Okay.
developing CFS. And this is exactly what we've seen in long COVID. There are
Really?
lots of parallels with ME/CFS and long COVID. That's
Okay.
exactly what we've seen.
Okay. So there's been an increased diagnosis since COVID because of the trauma and the different elements, I guess, people have been exposed to during that period.
Absolutely. Well, what I would say is COVID, whether it's COVID-19 or another virus, the COVID acts like a trigger for the immune system. It's like imagine just you're living in London, you're working hard, playing hard, or in the case of lockdown, you're stressing hard because you're with your
Yeah.
family and you can't escape. That's going on. Maybe you're not looking after yourself as well. You're going to sleep late. You're maybe having a few drinks before bed, etc., etc. And then the virus comes along and irritates the system, and then those emotional centers that are overactive during a time of stress can effectively lock your system into a state of fatigue. Um,
Okay.
so the way to prevent the chronic fatigue in that context is to try and keep yourself as relaxed as possible. Try and work a job that you at least enjoy a little bit. Because one of the biggest predictors of chronic fatigue or the development of trauma is this perceived state of inescapability, feeling it like you can't escape from that situation.
And does that make us more vulnerable when we?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. It's really interesting the different types of scenarios that make us more susceptible. It leads me to a question around this is a general question, but maybe you could apply it to yourself as well. Because it's quite, particularly when you were, I guess, suffering with it in 2012, I'm imagining it might be quite difficult to get family or friends to understand what's going on. So I'm wondering what it's like for for the sufferers in terms of how their families and friends are able to understand what somebody that's got chronic fatigue syndrome is actually going through.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question actually, because I would say the two biggest problems for chronic illness sufferers are communicating their issues to their doctors and trying to get a helpful doctor to understand and help them. Secondly, trying to get their families to understand and support them in whatever way they can. So I think I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion that I have quite an obsessive mind. So when I want to do something, my brain latches on and doesn't let go. Some people just call that stubborn. I don't know, obsessive, whatever you want to call it. I kind of knew my truth. I knew something wasn't right, and I was working with people who kind of were offering solutions, and I was doing everything I could to follow those solutions. So, for example, a strict diet, for example, without gluten, dairy. I'll be honest, certain family members in my household were not helpful, were counterproductive, were giving me a hard time, saying it was all in my mind, it's all nonsense, you don't need to be on this diet, etc., etc. It's really hard, and it was very difficult. It was very difficult, but you just have to be true to you as much as possible. You don't need to justify, but it helps just to explain a little bit. And like I mean, I say this flippantly, but there's never been a better time to develop CFS or long COVID. Now people get it. Now people understand it.
Yeah.
People are, even the workplaces are very familiar with long COVID, and it's a household brand now, CFS. So you got to do your best to communicate, but don't justify and explain it as much as possible. The truth is, even if you do take the time to explain it to a family member, some of them might take it, but a lot of them will also just forget it and then ask you in a couple of weeks, what's wrong with you being like this?
Yeah, and I can imagine that regardless of the makeup of our families, I think you're always going to get some members of your family that will shrug their shoulders at a condition that if we've got a broken arm or something, or we've got a bandage on our leg or our arm, then people can understand that. But when we've got these types of conditions, lots of people, because we don't have the medical, I guess, base, we just can be quite flippant in terms of thinking, why can't they pull themselves together?
Exactly. And it's it's one of the work, we're primarily wired to be similar to our pack, right? To have everything in common with our pack and to feel safe and protected. But in some respects, that illness acts, whether it's CFS or long COVID, etc., it can almost act as a difference. But like I said, you've got to be true to you. Know what you're going through is a real thing, but there are solutions. But you've got to do what's just best for you. And generally, in my experience, relatives do come around eventually, because what normally happens is they'll either, if they're very proactive, they'll listen to podcasts or read up about it. But normally the catalyst is they're at work and they're talking to someone and their kid has got the same thing, or their family member's got something. And then they come home and they're like, oh, actually, oh my God, you've got this thing now. I understand what it is.
Yeah, I can relate to that 100%, where you've been saying something and they totally ignore you. Actually, I've actually been in scenarios where I might have been telling a family member something and it's totally been dismissed. But then I happen to be with them and somebody else says maybe their son has got a similar condition and it totally gets endorsed. I'm thinking, I've been telling this for years.
Exactly. I've got friends who are doctors, right? And they've just had kids and their kids have had fevers, and their mum's there and the mum's like, you need to see a doctor, take them to a doctor. And they're looking at their parent like, are you kidding me? I've been a doctor for 10 years. Like,
yeah, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. I'll get onto the nutrition bit in a second, but then I don't think I've answered this question. So I think you touched upon it a little bit, but what was the isolation like at that time?
You mean
So for that period where you were sort of bedridden and you weren't able to kind of get out and see people, I'm just thinking about, was there any periods of isolation where you thought, I just love to have some contact with people, regardless of how limited it is?
So yes and no. So one thing anybody with CFS will tell you, the life has been sucked out of you. I always describe it as having a run-in with a dementor from
Okay.
The life has been totally sucked out of you. So in some ways, it's the last thing on your mind to actually even talk to people. But there were, for me, the summer, my symptoms would always get better in the summer, and my friends would come, because a lot of them lived abroad. They would come come to London, and we would spend a day together in London, and that was enough to give me some steam. Yeah, and also again, that is I'm not a huge fan of smartphone technology and social media, but that is where social media comes into its own. It does offer some hope.
Yeah. And do you think that through the process you've become more resilient, or you became more resilient?
It's an interesting one because a lot of people would argue, including a therapist who I've been seeing for over a year, would say, actually, I've always been very naturally, unconsciously resilient. I would say my resilience weirdly has gone down a lot, having recovered from it. I don't know if I'm just a little bit burnt out from being burnt out. I don't know. But
That's tough.
yeah, yeah.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, but I would say overall I am resilient. I would say so, yeah.
Okay. So turning point, I think you mentioned earlier, and I've become trying to come back to this point, was your diet and nutrition. How did that come into play? What was the intervention that came into play there, and how did you notice things started to change?
So I saw the first nutritional therapist I saw recommended a diet called, well, at the time, it was called but it was presented to me as the nutritional balancing diet. But really what we know now, or what I know now, is also called the autoimmune paleo diet. People will probably heard of that. So it's essentially a very nutrient dense diet where you're eating 5, 6, 7, 8 vegetables per day with some protein every meal. I was having no dairy, no gluten, no nuts and seeds, no tomatoes, and no eggs for the most part. And that was an absolute game changer. The brain fog improved. I can't say energy improved massively, but for me, my biggest symptom was brain fog and the allergies. I was very sensitive to things, food sensitivities. All of that stuff went away, and I kind of felt in a much better place to then tackle the fatigue.
Okay. So when you were recommended the the food change, was that with somebody that had treated people before with similar symptoms?
Absolutely, yeah. So this nutritional therapist was very experienced, and he'd been working with a lot of athletes who had developed CFS, often after their careers, or sort of either
Really?
yeah,
After
with a
their
lot of
careers?
up and coming athletes, or a lot of careers at the a lot of sorry, a lot of athletes at the end of their careers.
Okay. Okay. So you saw a change there. And then at that point, you actually got into, yeah, I guess you retrained at some point. How long after this process were you fit enough and well enough to think about, actually, this is a career path that I want to pursue?
Yeah, so it wasn't actually until just thinking out loud, I was about 26-ish, 26, 27 when I decided to retrain as a nutritional therapist. So it was about 2 or 3 years into working with this NT that I decided to retrain. Because still at that point, even in those first couple of years, I didn't feel well enough to really work full
Yeah.
time, do anything. But I thought, as I got my strength back, I thought I've got to do something with this. Um,
Okay. And was that for a sense of curiosity, or was it a sense of you want to know more about this to help others, or a bit of everything?
um, I mean, I'll be honest with you. Through that whole journey, I mean, I'd basically done a nutritional therapy degree anyway, just through my recovery.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was a bit like, I don't know, the way I described it, it was kind of like, I don't know, wanting to learn how to kick, do a free kick, right? And then
Yeah.
you just accidentally meet David Beckham, who becomes your
Yeah.
mate and just unconsciously like, teaches you how to kick a free
Yeah.
kick. But then you've got to go back to soccer school and learn everything again.
Okay.
So yeah, so I was very lucky in that I actually worked with two of what I describe as the best NTs in the country at that time, and they kind of took me under their wing as well. So it taught me a hell of a lot. So I went back to study as a formality, but I learned it. I do what I do now because I want to help people like me who are in that same place.
Okay. And for people that maybe like me, I guess, that want a little bit of clarity about what nutritional therapist is and what they do, If maybe you can expand upon what it is and what they do and what you do.
Yeah, of course. So some people get it mixed up with dietetics, with a dietitian, and dietitians are um, centrally governed discipline, and they work in hospitals. They have to conduct compulsory training in hospitals, um, and generally their goal is to provide adequate levels of nutrition to allow a human to survive, either just like a healthy human survive in the modern world, or a patient in a clinical setting who's had an operation, for example, or has cancer. That their goal is just to help somebody survive. Then you have nutritionists, and nutritionists, there is technically, you don't need a qualification to call yourself a nutritionist, but generally nutritionist goals are to offer advice to optimize your diet, potentially recommend some supplements just to support your overall well-being. Then you have nutritional therapists, who I describe are at the sort of more pointy end of the nutrition space. And what we do is try and address and support the root causes behind many different chronic diseases. Diet is a tool. It's not the primary tool or primary intervention. Diet is a tool, but we use supplements. And then someone like myself, we use herbal tinctures, we use homeopathic stuff, whatever remedies are needed to help address the root cause.
Okay, and that will be, I guess, diagnosis and recommendations to be done based on the symptoms and the conversations you have with individual patients. Would that be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. So now a lot of my patients come through referrals from GPs and specialists. So they kind of already have a diagnosis. They walk in with letters and scans. My job is to try and see things that medicine can't see through their scans and through their offerings.
That must be really interesting and challenging, to almost like a Rubik's Cube, to work out, to get I guess, their records, go through them, and then try and identify what treatment should look like for them.
Absolutely. And I always say what we do is very, very bespoke. So you can have two clients, the same age, same gender, same condition, but they walk away with completely different remedies.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, so you studied, and you are a nutritional therapist. You also decided to study neuroscience. Why did you decide you wanted to study neuroscience? And are they, in terms of what you do you blend them together in terms of your approach to working with patients?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So I think I mentioned my biggest symptom was brain fog, just difficulty concentrating, recalling information, focusing, even just having a social conversation was really hard work. And the words weren't coming out, and I felt very anxious, and it was an awful state. That was my biggest symptom. I always say, you can give me fatigue for the rest of my life, but if I have brain fog and I'm not able to fulfill my potential,
Yeah.
please, just call it a day now. So my goal, basically, I wanted to try and have my clinic, but also conduct research to try and figure out the underlying mechanisms of brain fog, and then kind of be a bridge between the two. I also wanted to sort of be a bridge between mainstream neurology and kind of what I do, which is kind of actually taking shape at the moment. So yeah, so my goal really is to try and translate research, try and figure out the mechanisms, and then translate it into the real world and what we do.
Okay. Okay. It must be incredibly I guess it's incredibly rewarding for a number of reasons. It's always incredibly rewarding to be able to help people that are suffering from a difficult moment, but particularly because of your journey. Because I'm sure, possibly in some patients, when you speak to them, maybe you can see your journey in terms of stage that they're at that particular time.
Yeah, that's another beautiful question and observation. It's very true. Yeah, I do, and it does personally affect me a lot. Actually, I'll be honest. At the end of the day, sometimes I'll have a good cry because it does. It is like seeing mirror image, and I think empathize with that, with the trauma that preceded the development of the CFS or whatever their condition is. So yeah, 100%. It is. I definitely think it. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And when you see patients, are you seeing patients? Are there any correlations? So, are you seeing different age groups? Are you seeing people that are visiting you that maybe they're in a stressful job? Are there any correlations, or was it quite varied?
So when I started the practice, I kind of on my website I have a very long story and a bio of sort of my journey. And what happened is a lot of sort of kids, dare I say, were finding my website in their sort of late teens, early 20s, who were experiencing exactly the same thing. And I would get messages all the time saying, Inder, I found your Google, your message, oh my, your story is very similar to mine. Oh my God, I need to see you. So I would say yes. So I kind of have two cohorts actually at the moment. I have those young patients in their 20s who are living in the city, trying to survive, corporate jobs. A lot of them come from corporate jobs,
Okay.
some from trauma. And then I also have a lot of older patients in their 50s, 60s who are dealing with things like Parkinson's and MS and dementias and things like that.
Okay. Do you have to have any? You mentioned the therapist. Because of the people that you're seeing that clearly are in challenging moments. Do you have to have support to kind of uplift you? Because I can imagine it. I've interviewed psychologists and bits and pieces who have worked in difficult environments, and sometimes they've said to me that they have a coach or a counselor just to kind of help them process if they're continually dealing with challenge situations.
Yes, so I do, as I mentioned, I do see a therapist. To be honest with you, though, I don't really speak much about patients, very rarely.
Yeah.
I'd say with what I do, we're not really talking that much about the psychological aspects. So I'm kind of protected in that
Mm.
sense. But I do, there's no doubt about it. Like I only see 3 or 4 patients a day, but I do take on some of their stuff. I'm quite
Mm.
sensitive. So I do have some rituals to try and clear the gunk out, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And is it easier now forgive me, you might have already covered this, but I'm just thinking for people now that maybe listen to this, they might have a daughter, they might have a husband, it might even be them that maybe they can relate to some of the symptoms that have been described today. Is it easier today for people to go and maybe research it online or maybe speak to, do you go and are you going to speak to your GP or are there specialist people that you go and speak to as a first port I guess a first connection point?
So I think it depends which part of the country or which part of the world you're in. If you're more, I'd like to think now, as I mentioned, GPs are far more educated, far more aware of certain conditions. So if I would definitely still say that the GP is a first port of call. I do find as well though that with these types of conditions, patients normally go to the internet first. I mean, I think we're all guilty.
Yeah. Mm.
Doctor Google, right? Uh,
Yeah.
but I would say, yeah, still see your GP, use online resources, but also the research. As although there's more money being poured into research, it's still not clinically helpful because we are finding abnormalities in the immune system, but you can't really get those tests very easily, say in the NHS or even privately. And even if you do get results, even if you do get faulty results, there's still not much that the practitioner could do or the doctor can do. So yeah, I would say speak to GP and now well, I should also say there are specialist clinics now, specialist long COVID / chronic fatigue clinics that you can go to.
Okay. Okay. And but in order to, if we do have something like chronic fatigue syndrome, is it something where we are going to need an intervention from somebody like you to, I guess, to get better, as opposed to maybe trying to deal with it on our own?
So there is a small proportion of patients, estimates vary, but it's somewhere between 10 and 20%, so up to 30 sometimes, depending on where you're reading, who do get better on their own. But in my experience, the large majority need some form of intervention. For some patients, again, a very small proportion, graded exercise therapy can work. It can work. But for the large majority, they do need a more meaningful intervention. There are a few ways to do it. There are some patients who are probably 30, 40%, up to 50% of patients who can get better using mindfulness-based therapies. So probably the most popular one right now is the Gupta Program, who I worked
Okay.
with. And that is but so I mentioned right at the beginning of the episode that people with CFS can have overactive emotional centers, threat detection centers that are firing all the time and being overactive. the Gupta program aims to basically reduce the activity of those centers so that you're not sending stress hormones, or you're not sending stress responses throughout the system, which then perpetuate symptoms. So in other words, you're calming down the nervous system, and you're retraining the nervous system to feel safe. And for about 50% of the patients, that program, doing it for anywhere between 1 and 6 months, is enough to pretty much get your life back. I've seen that. We've seen that now. There are clinical trials being conducted all around the world, happening right now.
Okay.
And we're seeing
And,
that.
and is that a supplement that are taken? What is the...
Oh, sorry. So that program is, sorry, I didn't explain that very well. So the program consists of meditation. It's a video program, so meditation, a little bit of breath work, but there's a proprietary technique in there that basically interrupts danger signals within the brain. So a lot of people
Okay.
so the theory goes that people with CFS have what we call increased interoceptive attention. So in other words, they are focusing on their bodies all the time. They're focusing on their symptoms. They're focusing on what they can't do. They get negative.
Okay. Yeah.
And that threat and that
Yeah.
stress, the emotional centers are highly overactive. That then sends a surge of stress hormones through the system, which then keep the symptoms in place. So the Gupta program is designed to interrupt all of those thoughts and to retrain the brain and the nervous system and the body to make it feel safe. So yeah, and that is often enough to pull someone out of major.
Okay. And do you do that, the Gupta program? Do you do that in conjunction with somebody like yourself? So you've got some type of supervision, or once you sign up for it, are you doing it independently, solely on your own?
So the beautiful thing about the Gupta program is it can be done from home. You don't need any supervision. There are
Okay.
Gupta coaches that you can add on to the program, but to be honest with you, most patients that I recommend it to don't. They just
Okay.
do it by themselves.
Okay. So we're getting towards the end now, but I've got a few questions, if I may. So you today, how are you today? Are you completely cured? Are you still mindful of diet and everything? So where are you today?
Yep. So it honestly depends on my stress levels. So I still to this day have a slightly overactive stress response system, and if I don't use the Gupta techniques for a while, I can sometimes put myself back into a state of negativity, stress, and the symptoms can creep back a little bit. Never to the extent that they were before, but they can creep
Yeah.
back. So I still have to use the Gupta program a little bit. Food sensitivities have gone pretty much. I eat pretty much what I want. Energy levels are
Really? So you've gone back to being able to eat what you want?
yes.
Okay.
Although to be honest with you, I avoid gluten anyway, so I don't eat,
Okay.
but I can eat gluten if I want to.
Okay. That's interesting. So just in terms of the food nutrition piece, is that really to get you over the initial pits, the initial condition that you have, and then once that's eradicated, I guess there's almost a pincer movement where you can start to maybe look at some foods that maybe weren't part of that process to get you out of the fog that you were in.
Absolutely, yeah. So a large majority of patients with CFS have food sensitivities of some kind, sometimes allergies. And if your system is constantly responding to foods you're eating, or other things, you're being exposed to perfumes or chemicals, that will keep your system more inflamed and will make it much harder to recover. So it's a temporary short-term thing, 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
Just try and reduce that immune activity.
Okay, gotcha. And so obviously today you've got your clinic, a wonderful clinic you're doing wonderful work with. There's something that I'm referring back to the podcast I listened to where you said, we briefly spoke about this before we hit the record button, but you said something that there were lots of things that grabbed me during that discussion, but this is one of the things that grabbed me as well, that you almost look forward to waking up in the morning and having challenges that you can work out how to solve. And I thought, wow, that's so refreshing, because when maybe I wake up and I've got challenges, it's almost like there's some, not hesitation, but I have to get myself going. And your approach definitely differs from mine. And I'm should never be jealous, but I was jealous when I heard that. But I was inspired by it as well. So maybe you can expand upon what I'm trying to convey.
Yeah, so I mean, I will firstly say, when I have problems or the practice is quiet or I'm feel like I'm not really achieving what I want to achieve, I do have moments of resignation or I just go, oh, bugger
Mm,
it. But that
yeah.
lasts normally like a day, and
Okay.
I normally try and just go to the beach or just try and take my mind somewhere else, just to let my brain try and figure it out. Um, I think, like in hospitality, when you're under a lot of pressure, the exciting bit about hospitality is the pressure and kind of not knowing what's going to happen next. Like I absolutely love that exciting feeling. Um, and it's probably also why I've gravitated towards medicine as well, because it offers that to you as well. So being in trouble up to a certain extent is exciting. I love feeling like there's a problem and I've got a very creative mind, so I like figuring out how to get around it. I will say the caveat to that though is that I generally I like that feeling and having a problem when I'm working with someone else. I love that sense of collaboration that
Okay.
and feeling like I don't know how I'm going to get out of this, what's going to happen. I love that feeling of jeopardy and excitement
Okay.
of the unknown.
So when you can bounce ideas of other people.
Yes, yeah, that's a
Okay.
very important factor, and that is one of the downsides of what I do because I am basically a one-man band. So
Yeah.
yeah, I find that challenging.
Okay. Okay. Inder, loved talking to you. Loved meeting you. So for people that maybe want to find out more about you, you've got a website and obviously you've got your clinic. So what's the best way for people to get in contact with you or find out more about you?
Yeah, so they can visit my website, which is theneuropath.com, or if they just type in Inder Virdi into Google, my website will pop up. I've done I'm on YouTube quite a lot now, so you can just type my name into YouTube, it should come up. Yeah, or on Instagram as well. Just type my name. Yeah.
Okay, lovely, lovely. And if people recognize any of these symptoms in maybe a family member or someone, can they contact you regarding that?
Absolutely. So one thing I always say is just people don't have to call me just for an appointment. They can call me if just for an idea. I often say I'm happy to just nudge them in the right direction, whatever that may be, with the doctor, with myself, whoever that may be.
Okay. And do you have to see patients in person or can it be phone call? Can it be Zoom? Or does it have to be in person?
So it depends. For CFS patients, I like to see them in person uh,
Okay.
because of yeah, the way we help with the way we sort of support patients is we need them in person.
Okay, lovely, lovely. And I think this is the last question. This is the recurring question. So if you could invite three inspirational people to dinner, they can be alive or past, who might you invite?
So um, the first one would definitely be Avicii or Tim Berg,
Okay.
the DJ music producer. Um, I resonate very deeply, and I set myself a goal a couple of years ago that I want to be the Avicii of what I do.
Well, you're on your way, clearly.
I don't know about that, but so I want because I'm very creative, and I kind of through my work, I want to kind of touch people in a way he did with his music. The second, I would say, possibly is Michael Jackson. I think Michael Jackson was very misunderstood. Criminal accusations aside, I think he was very misunderstood, and he was a not only a musical genius, but he was a business genius. And people,
Child genius as well. Child, he was making music from before he was 10. He was a
yeah,
superstar before he was 10.
but he was a real business genius, and people didn't actually get that. Like people thought he just made these amazing tracks, and then the business just took care of itself. No, he knew everything that was going on in his business. So yeah, I would say Michael Jackson from a business perspective.
What more than music or both?
Uh, no, like I said, although his music's amazing, I'm not a huge fan of his music, but I am a huge
Really? Okay.
I'm a huge fan of
That's interesting, actually.
him as a person and as a business person. Nothing you ever saw of Michael Jackson was an accident.
Mm,
It was very deliberate. And Tim Berg, Avicii was very similar as well. They were
mm,
both of them very good.
okay.
And then the third person, I was debating. It would either be Donald Trump, or Sir Philip Green. And right now,
Okay.
I've gone off Trump a little bit. So Sir Philip Green, I think, for who the owner of Arcadia,
Okay.
VHS Topshop.
That would that would be an interesting dinner. It'd be fascinating to get a sense of what would be discussed. I guess the thing with dinners, and you've probably seen this from working in fine dining restaurants, you kind of just get people to rock up and then just see what happens.
Exactly right. Exactly. But they are very, it'd be a very, I think I have a feeling it'd be a serious, very deep discussion. I'd love to just gain insight into their minds.
Yeah. Inder, fascinating meeting you. I was excited to have this conversation with you today. You've got an amazing journey, and I know that this is only part of it. Actually, I've just got one more question. What do you have a vision for the clinics? Are you looking to grow your brand and maybe connect with as many people as you can across the country? Just because obviously you're operating in a space where the knowledge base is growing, but obviously it needs all the support and help it can get.
Yeah, so I kind of I have kind of two aspects to my existence, I like to say. So I have my clinic, which is kind of like a cave existence where I'm sitting in a cave treating the patients or also supporting the patients. And I like to do that in the corner. My second branch is giving talks and lectures, educating the public, helping patients, inspiring patients, educating other practitioners. I absolutely love that bit. That's what it's like, the performer aspect of me that I absolutely love and don't do enough of at the moment. So yeah, my practice, I'm very happy with where that's at the moment. But I would like to think that I am developing a reputation for being a go-to guy to help these patients. But I actually want to develop my reputation and my name for being a speaker, an educator.
That go-to person.
Yeah.
That go-to person. As you were talking earlier, and this is you talking now is reminded me of what I had a thought earlier when you were talking. So wellness is obviously, certainly since the pandemic, has become more into people's consciousness about making sure that we're supported in terms of our well-being and our wellness, particularly for businesses. So have you thought about approaching companies? Because companies need to know about this. They could have, all kinds of challenges with staff that, like you, when you were working in the restaurants, when these symptoms arrived, there could be professionals listening to this now who might identify with themselves, or it could be maybe colleagues that are suffering. And having someone like you going in to speak to teams would be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, so I do give well-being talks to companies. I'll be honest, it's usually about more, I dare I say, it's not trivial, is the wrong word, but more sort of generic topics like heart disease and mental health, gut health, etc. But no, I actually haven't really reached out to talk about CFS itself.
I think that would be quite interesting, just because of this wellness approach. But okay, so I've taken up enough of your time, but let's definitely stay in touch. Let's definitely do this again. Definitely inspired by your journey and what you're doing. So thank you for your time today.
Pleasure, Paul. Thank you so much. Lovely to meet you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of My Perfect Failure. We're always looking to grow the show, so please let me know what you like and what you don't like. You can contact me at paul@myperfectfailure.com, or you can contact me via the contact page on the website. So take care for now. Bye.
Thanks for listening to My Perfect Failure podcast. Be sure to visit www.myperfectfailure.com to join the conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play. Look out for our next episode.